It all started on a Monday morning that felt like any other. At least that's what everyone thought. The bright hum of Atlanta International Airport filled the air. The rolling of suitcases, the distant crackle of announcements over the speakers, and the impatient shuffle of travelers moving from one gate to another. Flight 237 to New York was already delayed by 20 minutes, and passengers were getting restless. Parents tried to keep their kids entertained. Business travelers furiously typed away on laptops, and tired tourists leaned against their luggage, dreaming of coffee. But among them was one woman who stood out, not because she wanted to, but because of what fate was about to throw her way. Alicia Carter, a young black woman in her late 20s, had just wrapped up a technology conference where she'd given her very first presentation as a senior software engineer. It had gone better than she ever expected. Her slides were crisp, her ideas had been praised, and even her boss had told her, "You've got a bright future ahead." Now, she was heading home to New York, her mind filled with plans for the week, her heart light. She loved flying. Something about sitting by the window, watching the clouds roll by, gave her peace. When the gate agent finally called for boarding, Alicia joined the line, clutching her small carry-on bag and boarding pass. She smiled politely at the gate agent, scanned her ticket, and stepped onto the jet bridge, breathing in that familiar, sterile airplane air. Inside the cabin, she found her seat at 12A right by the window. The seat she'd carefully chosen days ago. She placed her laptop bag under the seat, took out her headphones, and leaned back, ready for a quiet flight home. The passengers around her were still finding their seats, a soft mix of voices filling the cabin. Everything felt calm, ordinary. That calm, however, was about to shatter like glass. Just as Alicia was scrolling through her playlist, she heard a sharp voice from the aisle. "Excuse me. She's sitting in my daughter's seat." Heads turned instantly. The tone was commanding, indignant, the kind of voice that demanded to be obeyed. Alicia looked up, startled. A middle-aged white woman stood just a few rows away, perfectly manicured, dressed in expensive travel clothes, and beside her, a teenage girl who looked mortified to even be there. The mother's expression was full of irritation, like she'd been personally wronged by the universe. Alicia blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" The woman crossed her arms. "That's my daughter's seat. We paid for a window, and you're in it." Alicia glanced at her ticket and then at the seat number above her. "This is 12A, she said calmly. "That's what's printed on my boarding pass." "Yes," the woman snapped, "but my daughter doesn't like the middle seat. She gets anxious. Be kind and move, please. She's a child." The please came out coded in condescension, more of a command than a request. Alicia felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is my assigned seat. Maybe the airline can help you find another arrangement." The woman's lips thinned. "Unbelievable. You're really not going to give up your seat for a child." Passengers began to shift uncomfortably. The teenager tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Mom, it's fine, I can just sit here." But the mother wasn't listening. She was too busy glaring at Alicia, as if she had broken some unspoken rule. "Young people these days have no manners," the woman said loudly, clearly intending everyone around to hear. "No respect for others." Alicia felt heat rise to her face. She wasn't looking for conflict, she never was, but something about the woman's tone told her that this wasn't really about a seat. It was about power, about entitlement, about the kind of person who believed the world should rearrange itself around her whims. Still, Alicia tried to stay composed. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I'm not comfortable giving up a seat I paid for." The woman scoffed. "Figures," she muttered under her breath, loud enough that a few nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances. "You people never think of anyone but yourselves." That phrase, "you people," hit like a dart. Alicia froze for a moment. Her stomach twisted, but she refused to let her dignity slip. She turned toward the window, deciding it was best to disengage. But the mother wasn't done. "I'm going to talk to the flight attendant," she announced, voice sharp enough to slice through the chatter of the cabin. "This is unacceptable." As she stormed toward the front of the plane, Alicia noticed the uncomfortable silence that followed her. No one dared to say anything. Some looked sympathetic, others just looked away. Alicia put her earbuds back in, trying to steady her breathing. She reminded herself of what her grandmother always said. Don't let anyone steal your peace. They'll only win if you let them. Still, she couldn't help but feel the weight of eyes on her. The quiet judgment, the whispers, the tension thick enough to touch. She didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning, because the woman wasn't about to let it go. And soon the situation would spiral so far out of control that it would draw the attention of someone powerful, someone whose response would shock the entire plane, and eventually, the whole airport. The moment that would soon unfold would be talked about for days, filmed by strangers and shared across social media. A perfect example of what happens when entitlement meets grace, and respect wins over arrogance. And it all began with that single, entitled demand, "Move, my daughter wants the window seat." The atmosphere inside the airplane grew heavy, like a storm brewing in a confined space. Every passenger could feel it. That tension you can almost taste in the air, the kind that makes people shift in their seats and pretend they're not listening when, in truth, they're hanging on to every word. The entitled mother stood in the aisle, her designer handbag slung over one arm, still fuming as if the universe itself had wronged her. She wasn't just annoyed anymore. She was offended. The nerve of that woman, the one sitting in the window seat, to actually refuse her. You could see it in her posture, in the way her chin lifted slightly higher, her lips pressed tighter. She wasn't going to let it go. The teenage daughter, however, looked like she wanted to disappear. Her cheeks were pink with embarrassment, her eyes darting between her mother and Alicia. She tried to whisper again, "Mom, it's fine, really. I'll sit in the middle seat. It's just a short flight." But her mother waved her off as if her words didn't matter. "No," the woman snapped, loud enough for several rows to hear. "It's not fine. You shouldn't have to sit somewhere uncomfortable just because some people refuse to be decent." The words stung, sharp, passive-aggressive, and dripping with entitlement. Alicia felt every syllable like a tap on her shoulder, daring her to respond. But she didn't want a scene. She wasn't the type to argue in public. Her mother had always taught her that strength wasn't about shouting louder. It was about holding your head high when others tried to bring you down. So she stayed seated, calm, her eyes fixed on her phone. But she could still feel the woman's glare burning holes into her. A flight attendant, noticing the commotion, quickly approached. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. The kind of professional calmness that comes from dealing with far too many impatient travelers. The mother turned toward her dramatically, her voice full of false politeness. "Finally, yes, there's a problem. This woman is sitting in my daughter's seat. She needs the window. I'm sure we can fix this easily if she just moves." The flight attendant blinked, then looked at Alicia. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Alicia handed it over without a word. The attendant checked, then pulled up the seat map on her tablet. "Seat 12A, that's correct," she said. "You're in your assigned seat, Miss Carter." She turned to the mother. "And you, ma'am, are in seats 12B and 12C, which are right here next to her." The woman's jaw tightened. "I understand that," she said, her tone sharpening. "But surely there's some flexibility here. My daughter hates sitting in the middle. It makes her anxious. She's just a child." The daughter's face went red. "Mom, I'm fine, really." But the mother ignored her, her voice growing louder. "You'd think someone like her would show a little compassion," she said, nodding toward Alicia. "It's not that hard to switch seats." The words, "someone like her," made a few people nearby look up sharply. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The condescending tone, the emphasis, the way her eyes flicked over Alicia, as if she were somehow less deserving. The flight attendant's professionalism faltered for a brief second, but she quickly recovered. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "passengers cannot be forced to give up their seats. If Ms. Carter doesn't wish to move, that's her right." "Oh, come on," the woman scoffed. "Are you really taking her side?" "This is ridiculous." The attendant maintained her calm tone. "I'm simply following policy. Please take your assigned seats so we can begin boarding." The woman folded her arms. "No, I want to speak to your supervisor." By now, passengers were openly watching. Man a few rows back muttered under his breath, "Here we go." Another woman whispered to her friend, "She's really doing too much." Alicia sat quietly, her fingers clenched around her phone. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about dignity, about being treated as an equal, not as someone who had to bow down to arrogance disguised as privilege. The mother's voice rose again, shrill and commanding. "I'm not sitting until this is resolved. I paid for this flight just like everyone else." At that moment, a flight attendant made a quick call to the cockpit, her voice low and professional. Whatever she said, it made the other crew members exchange glances. Alicia saw one of them nod, then quietly step toward the front of the plane. A few moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a slight delay as we resolve a seating issue. We appreciate your patience." A murmur spread through the cabin. The mother looked triumphant for a moment. She thought she'd finally gotten what she wanted. But little did she know, the situation was about to take a turn that would leave her speechless. Alicia took a deep breath, still trying to center herself. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to look angry. She just wanted to stay invisible. But invisibility wasn't an option anymore. People were watching her now, some with sympathy, some with discomfort, and a few with that quiet admiration for how she hadn't lost her cool. The flight attendant leaned down to whisper something to Alicia. "Just hang tight," she said softly. "You did nothing wrong." Alicia nodded, offering a faint, grateful smile, and then, just as the murmurs began to settle, a ripple of movement passed through the aisle. The captain himself was walking down from the cockpit, his crisp uniform gleaming under the cabin lights, his expression unreadable. The mother straightened in her seat, assuming she'd finally found someone who'd side with her. But what she didn't realize was that this man wasn't about to let injustice slide, not on his plane. The flight that had started as just another morning trip was now moments away from becoming something unforgettable, something that would shake the entire plane and send a powerful message about respect, equality, and standing up for what's right. The murmur in the cabin grew louder as the tall figure of the pilot stepped down the narrow aisle. His presence instantly changed the energy on board. The flight attendant straightened up, passengers leaned slightly toward the aisle, and even the mother who had been shouting moments ago quieted, though not for long. The embroidered wings on his uniform gleamed under the lights as he stopped by row 12. His expression was calm, professional, but there was a firmness in his eyes that said he had seen this kind of thing before. "Good morning. Folks," he began, his voice steady and composed, the kind of voice that could soothe a nervous flyer. "I'm Captain Rivers. I understand there's a seating issue here?" The entitled mother immediately jumped in, cutting him off before he could finish. "Yes, finally. Thank you for coming. This woman," she pointed at Alicia without hesitation, "is sitting in my daughter's seat. We paid for the window, but she refuses to move. I don't understand how this airline can allow something like this." Her tone dripped with indignation. You could tell she believed the pilot's arrival meant she was about to get her way. But Captain Rivers didn't rush to agree. Instead, he turned to Alicia, his expression softening. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass, please?" Alicia handed it over silently, her heart pounding. She hadn't done anything wrong, but all eyes were on her. She could feel the weight of the entire cabin's attention pressing down. The captain glanced at the pass, nodded once, then looked at the seat map on his tablet. "C12A, that's correct," he said clearly. "You're in the right place." Then he turned to the mother. "And you are in seats 12B and 12C?" "Yes," she snapped, arms crossed. "But my daughter wants the window. She gets anxious in the middle. I'm sure this woman can show some kindness and move." "It's not a big deal." The pilot raised an eyebrow. "Actually, ma'am, it is a big deal. Every seat is assigned for a reason. Passengers choose and pay for their seats ahead of time. She's not required to move for anyone." The mother frowned, clearly not expecting resistance. "You don't understand. I'm not asking for much. She's young. She can handle sitting in another spot." "My daughter's just a child." The captain glanced at the teenager, who looked mortified. "How old are you, miss?" he asked gently. 17, she said quietly, barely meeting his eyes. The captain nodded. 17. Old enough to handle a middle seat for a short flight, wouldn't you say? The daughter gave a small, hesitant nod. "Yes, sir. But before she could say anything else, her mother interjected sharply. "Don't agree to that. You always get anxious. Remember?" The girl sighed. "Mom, please." "It's fine." Now it was the pilot's turn to take a step forward. He wasn't angry, but his voice carried authority. "Ma'am, I need you to listen carefully. You have no right to demand another passenger move from their assigned seat. This young lady is exactly where she's supposed to be. If you continue to argue or disrupt boarding, I'll have to ask you to step off the aircraft until this is resolved." A gasp rippled through the cabin. The mother blinked, clearly not expecting this turn of events. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice trembling between disbelief and anger. "You're threatening me? I'm just trying to make sure my daughter is comfortable." "I'm completely serious," Captain Rivers replied calmly. "No one on my plane will be disrespected or treated unfairly. Every passenger deserves to be comfortable. That includes Miss Carter." For a moment, no one moved. The mother's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for something to say, but the words wouldn't come. Around her, passengers started whispering. A few smiled quietly, relieved that someone was finally saying what they all wanted to say. A man in the next row muttered, "About time someone stood up to her." The pilot wasn't finished. "Ma'am," he said, maintaining his professional tone, "you have two choices. You and your daughter can remain seated in the seats you paid for, or I can have you both rebooked on the next flight. But this plane will not be leaving until you make that decision." The silence was thick. The mother's face flushed crimson as she looked around, realizing that the attention she had demanded was now turning against her. The teenage daughter sank lower in her seat, wishing she could vanish. Finally, after what felt like forever, the mother huffed loudly and said through gritted teeth, "Fine, we'll stay here." The pilot gave a short nod. "Thank you. I appreciate your cooperation." Then he turned to Alicia and said with genuine kindness, "Ma'am, I apologize for the inconvenience. You did nothing wrong. Thank you for your patience." Alicia managed a small smile, her voice steady but quiet. "Thank you, Captain." He smiled back, giving a reassuring nod before addressing the passengers as a whole. "All right, folks, we're ready to get everyone settled and in the air. Let's remember, we're all sharing this space. A little respect goes a long way." That single line struck something deep in everyone. A few passengers even clapped softly, a small ripple of applause spreading down the aisle. The captain didn't linger for praise. He simply turned and walked back toward the cockpit, leaving a trail of calm in his wake. The mother didn't say another word. Her daughter leaned closer, whispering something Alicia couldn't hear, but the look on her face said it all: gratitude, mixed with embarrassment. Alicia looked out the window, finally allowing herself to exhale. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, sunlight reflecting off the wings as the engines hummed to life. She hadn't wanted attention. She hadn't wanted a confrontation. All she wanted was peace, and now, finally, she had it. But what she didn't realize then was that this small act of standing her ground, paired with the captain's fairness, would soon echo far beyond that airplane cabin. Someone had recorded the entire thing, and before long, the world would be talking about the pilot who refused to let arrogance win, and the woman who stayed graceful under pressure. As the engines roared to life and the plane lifted off the ground, the heavy tension that had filled the cabin began to melt away. People settled into their seats, plugged in their headphones, and pretended to move on. But the earlier confrontation still lingered in the air like the echo of thunder after a storm. The mother sat stiffly in her seat, arms folded, staring straight ahead. Her teenage daughter had gone silent, her cheeks still flushed with embarrassment. And next to them, Alicia sat quietly by the window, gazing out at the clouds below. For the first time since boarding, she could finally breathe. The sky outside was soft and golden, the clouds rolling beneath them like cotton. Yet even with the beauty of the view, she couldn't shake the unease in her chest. She replayed the entire scene in her mind, the accusing finger, the harsh tone, the condescending words. She had done nothing wrong, but she had still been made to feel like she didn't belong. Alicia leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Her grandmother's words echoed softly in her mind, the same ones she'd grown up hearing. "When they try to bring you down, baby, you rise higher. Grace will always speak louder than anger." She smiled faintly, remembering how her grandmother would always tell her to choose dignity over pride, even when it was hard. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't argued, hadn't allowed herself to be pulled into the woman's bitterness. And because of that, she realized, she'd won something much bigger than a seat. She'd won her peace. Across the aisle, a few passengers exchanged quiet comments. One woman whispered to her husband, "I've never seen anyone handle something like that so calmly." He nodded. "Yeah, that pilot too, good man." The mother, meanwhile, kept her eyes glued to the seatback screen, pretending to watch the safety video that was looping silently. But it was clear her mind was elsewhere. Her face was flushed, her jaw tight, her pride stung. No one around her was giving her the sympathy she expected. The people she thought would side with her were instead giving Alicia quiet, approving smiles whenever she looked up. As the flight attendants moved down the aisle with the beverage cart, one of them stopped by Alicia's row. "Ms. Carter," she said softly, bending down so no one else could hear, "the captain wanted me to tell you again that he's sorry for what happened. And your coffee's on us today." Alicia blinked, surprised, and smiled gratefully. "Thank you. That's very kind. Not as kind as how you handled yourself," the attendant replied with a wink before moving on. It wasn't much, just a simple cup of coffee. But to Alicia, it meant everything. It meant someone had noticed. Someone cared. An hour into the flight, the mother finally shifted in her seat, clearly restless. She kept glancing at her phone as if wanting to say something, but her daughter was pretending to sleep, her earbuds in and her face turned away. The older woman sighed loudly, hoping someone might engage her, but no one did. Her arrogance had isolated her. The silence around her was its own kind of punishment. Meanwhile, Alicia took out her notebook from her bag, the same one she'd used at the conference, and began jotting down thoughts, not about work this time, but about what had just happened. She wrote about entitlement, about respect, about how people still judged others without knowing them. She wasn't sure why she was writing, but something about putting her feelings on paper felt healing. As she wrote, she noticed a small movement beside her. The teenage girl had taken off her earbuds and was nervously glancing her way. Alicia looked up and gave her a soft smile. The girl hesitated for a moment before speaking in a small voice. I'm sorry about earlier. My mom shouldn't have said those things. I told her I was fine, but she never listens." Alicia's heart softened instantly. The poor girl looked genuinely ashamed. "Hey," Alicia said gently, "you don't need to apologize for her. You handled it really well." The girl nodded, eyes downcast. "You were really calm. I don't think I could have done that. I just wanted to say thank you for not yelling or anything." Alicia chuckled quietly. "Trust me, I wanted to. But sometimes the best thing you can do is stay quiet and let people see who they really are." The girl smiled, relief flickering in her eyes. "I hope she learned something from all this," she whispered. Alicia smiled softly. Maybe she did. Sometimes lessons don't come easy. For a brief moment, the two shared a quiet human connection that made the chaos from earlier seem smaller, like a dark cloud that had finally drifted away. The girl leaned back in her seat, a bit more, relaxed, and Alicia turned back toward the window, sipping her coffee. The rest of the flight passed peacefully. The mother said nothing more. The passengers returned to their movies and books, and Alicia allowed herself to drift into the steady hum of the plane. She didn't know yet that the entire event had been recorded by someone a few rows behind. The heated exchange, the captain's intervention, and the moment she'd sat silently with her head high while being insulted. When the plane began its descent into New York, the cabin lights dimmed, and passengers prepared for landing. Alicia looked out at the skyline peeking through the clouds, feeling lighter than she had when she boarded. What started as an uncomfortable morning had turned into a reminder that kindness and composure could still win in a world that often forgot their value. She fastened her seatbelt, smiled to herself, and whispered under her breath, "Grace always wins." And as the wheels touched down and the plane rolled smoothly along the runway, she had no idea that her calm act of strength, witnessed by a plane full of strangers, was about to become a story that would travel far beyond that flight, one that would soon make the whole world take notice. The landing gear touched the ground with a gentle thud, followed by the familiar hum of applause from a few relieved passengers. The morning sunlight streamed through the oval windows, washing the cabin in gold. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Alicia stared out at the busy runway, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. Her mind replayed everything that had happened in the last few hours. The shouting, the humiliation, the calm voice of the pilot, and the quiet apology from the young girl. It all felt strangely unreal, like a scene from a movie she hadn't meant to star in. When the plane finally came to a stop and the seatbelt sign went off, everyone jumped to their feet, eager to grab their bags and escape the stuffy cabin. Alicia, however, stayed seated, waiting for the crowd to thin out. She'd learned long ago that rushing only added stress. As she sat quietly, she noticed the pilot standing near the door, greeting passengers as they exited. His tall frame and composed presence gave off a sense of quiet authority. One by one, people walked past him, some offering quick smiles or nods of respect. When the entitled mother reached the front, she kept her head down, muttering something inaudible, her pride clearly bruised. Her daughter followed closely behind, but before stepping off, she turned back toward Alicia and offered one more small, grateful smile. It was quick and subtle, but it said everything words couldn't. When it was finally Alicia's turn to leave, Captain Rivers caught her eye and smiled warmly. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone sincere, "I just wanted to thank you for how you handled yourself today. You showed a level of patience and grace that most people wouldn't have. I'm sorry you were put in that situation." Alicia returned the smile, a mixture of gratitude and quiet strength in her eyes. "Thank you, Captain. I really appreciate that. I know it's not your job to deal with things like that, but you handled it perfectly," he chuckled lightly. "It kind of is my job," he said. "I don't just fly the plane. I make sure everyone on it is treated with respect. The sky doesn't care what color anyone is, and neither do I." Those words hit her deeply. She nodded, touched by his kindness. "Well," she said softly, "you made a bad day a lot better." He extended his hand. "Safe travels, Ms. Carter. The world needs more people like you." She shook his hand and thanked him again before stepping off the plane, her heart lighter than it had been in hours. Outside in the terminal, the airport buzzed with life. People hurried past with luggage. Announcements echoed over the speakers, and sunlight poured through the massive glass windows. Alicia walked slowly toward the baggage claim, her thoughts quiet but steady. She had faced something ugly and walked away with her dignity intact. That was enough. What she didn't realize, however, was that the story wasn't over. A few rows behind her on that flight, a college student named Eric had recorded part of the confrontation on his phone. He hadn't planned to. He just wanted to capture what was happening in case things escalated. But after the pilot stepped in and handled the situation with grace, Eric decided to share the video online, along with a caption that read, "Witnessed something powerful today." A black woman was harassed for sitting in her assigned seat, and the pilot stood up for her with calm authority. Respect costs nothing, but it means everything. Within hours, the video began to spread. People from all over the country shared it, praising both Alicia and Captain Rivers for their composure and dignity. The clip quickly went viral on social media. Millions of views in just a day. News outlets picked it up, headlines popping up everywhere. Pilot defends passenger from entitled traveler. Internet applauds. His leadership. Grace under pressure, woman stays calm during shocking. Airplane confrontation. Alicia's phone buzzed non-stop with messages from friends and co-workers who recognized her in the video. Some congratulated her, others told her how proud they were. She was surprised and a little overwhelmed. She hadn't sought attention, but somehow, her quiet act of strength had become a symbol of something larger. The airline itself issued a statement the following day, commending Captain Rivers for his professionalism and reaffirming its commitment to treating every passenger with respect. "We stand by our crew and passengers who uphold integrity and kindness," the statement read. "Respect is not optional, it's our standard." When Alicia read that, she couldn't help but smile. It felt good to see that something positive had come from such an uncomfortable moment. A few days later, she received an email from the airline inviting her to share her story privately with their team. As part of an initiative to improve staff and passenger training, they wanted to use her experience to remind others that small moments of courage can inspire real change. She accepted. Sitting at her kitchen table, looking out at the New York skyline, Alicia realized how powerful that day had been, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. The pilot's stand had shown that decency still existed in places you might not expect it, and her quiet strength had reminded thousands of people that you don't have to fight loudly to make your point. Sometimes the most powerful response is calm, unwavering self-respect. Weeks later, when she boarded another flight, this time for a vacation instead of work, a flight attendant greeted her at the door with a smile. "You're Alicia Carter, right?" she asked softly. "The woman from that video?" Alicia smiled shyly. "I guess that's me." The attendant's eyes sparkled. "You're an inspiration. Thank you for showing people what grace looks like." As Alicia walked down the aisle and found her seat, she glanced out the window and let out a quiet laugh. Life had a strange way of turning ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. She hadn't planned to make a statement that day in Atlanta. She just wanted to sit where she belonged. But sometimes standing your ground isn't about confrontation. It's about reminding the world that dignity doesn't need permission. And as the plane lifted once again into the open sky, Alicia closed her eyes and whispered the same words that had guided her through it all. Grace always wins.